Well, I think to some degree, you follow your passions and then you have to hope the wave catches you. I was always interested in computers. I was always interested in software. I was always a big reader. And so it wasn't, which made me alert to things like the internet and the possibility that you could build a bookstore online that would have universal selection. I think everybody has their own passion, their own thing that they're interested in, and then you're very alert to the things that are in the sphere of influence of that passion. Do something you're very passionate about, and don't try to chase what is kind of the hot passion of the day. I think we actually saw this. I think you see it all over the place in many different contexts, but I think we saw it in the internet world quite a bit, where at the sort of peak of the sort of internet mania in, say, 1999, you found people who were very passionate about something. They kind of left that job and decided, I'm going to go do something in the internet, because it's it was almost like the the 1849 gold rush in a way. I mean, you find that people, if you go back and study the history of the 1849 gold rush, you find that at that time everybody who was within shouting distance of California was, they might have been a doctor, but they quit being a doctor and they started panning for gold. And that almost never works. And even if it does work, according to some metric, financial success or whatever it might be, I suspect it leaves you ultimately unsatisfied. I think many kids and many grown-ups do figure out over time what their passions are. And sometimes we let I don't think it's that hard. I think what happens, though, sometimes is that we let our intellectual selves overrule those passions. And so that's what needs to be guarded against. Kids are very good about knowing what their passions are.
I first talked to my wife, who is sitting here in the audience, and she had married a relatively stable, goofy, but still relatively stable person working at a Wall Street firm. I worked at a quantitative hedge fund, and this was a hard decision. And I was looking for the right framework in which to make that kind of important decision. And the right framework I found is a regret minimization framework. And so that's just a nerdy way of saying that you want to project yourself to age 80 and then think back over your life. And if you're 80, you want to minimize the number of regrets you have throughout that period of time. I think this is something a lot of people do, maybe subconsciously. Very few people probably name it regret minimization framework, because most people are healthier than that. But it was a very clear way for me to think about making that kind of life decision. And the way it helped was, I thought, okay, if I go do this thing and participate in this thing called the internet that I genuinely believe is going to be a big deal, and if I fail, am I going to regret having tried and failed? And I knew the answer to that was no. But I also knew that if I didn't try, that I would always regret that. I would always wonder, and it would haunt me.
If anybody is an entrepreneur out there, it was a very clear lesson. Don't chase the buzzwords. It's so humorous to watch companies try to catch a wave. And really what you want to do is figure out what it is you do. And if you're a company that primarily serves consumers, and that's where your competencies lie, and that's what you've been focused on, don't change your business plan because that temporarily went out of vogue.
We know from our past experiences that big things start small. If you want to do anything new, you've got to be willing to let that acorn grow into a little sapling and then finally into a small tree, and maybe one day it'll be a big business on its own.
I think the most important thing is to very clearly separate, and it's so hard for people to do, but to very clearly separate the customer utility from the stock market. In other words, the companies that are getting built really are creating significant intrinsic value. What long-term investors want to do, they want you to figure out how to please your customers. The way you please long-term investors is with long-term results. And the way you get long-term results is by offering something of genuine value that improves people's lives, saves them time, saves them money. That's the way you do that. You know, it was only 3.5 years ago, it's very hard to remember, that when we, at the time of our IPO, we had annualized sales of about $60 million a year. Now, when you have sales of $60 million a year, if you can get a 1% operating efficiency by doing a bunch of hard work, that will net you, over the course of the year, 1% of 60 million, which is about $600,000. That's not very much money, and really what you should be doing is, instead of investing all of that executive bandwidth, time, energy, hardworking people on trying to get that 1% operating efficiency, you should instead be trying to build a company of the scale where 1% matters. Look at us versus most of the other competitors in our space. And by the way, the way we did that was by doing a great job for customers. And it wasn't that we were genius marketers or anything else. Our best marketing dollars have always been spent on making the website better and easier to use, and making distribution centers and customer service better. Those are our best marketing dollars. We have a very precise definition for what it means to be customer-centric. And it is 3 things: listen, invent, and personalize. And listening is probably the most traditional meaning of customer-centric. But I think that the second piece is most important, and it often involves not listening to your customers. And that is the invention. Because you have to remember that it's not the customer's job to invent for themselves. You know, every one of our customers has their own job, and they're inventing for their customers. And if you do focus groups and things, you will oftentimes be led astray when it comes to invention, because customers don't necessarily know in specific ways what it is that they would want. In fact, if you describe it to them, they may say, by the way, you know, I describe to many people, yeah, we're going to have a 1 million title book catalog, and you'll be able to order with your computer, and the books will come by UPS. And anybody, especially who was in the book business, thought this was a terrible idea. So listening only gets you so far.
You know, one of the things that it's very hard to believe when you're 22 or 23 years old is that you don't already know everything. It turns out, I mean, as I suspect, you know, people learn more and more as they get older, that you seem to realize that you know less and less every year that goes by. I can only imagine that by the time I'm, you know, 70, I will realize I know nothing. The stress primarily comes from not taking action over something that you can have some control over. So if I find that some particular thing is causing me to have stress, that's a warning flag for me. What it means is there's something that I haven't completely identified, perhaps in my conscious mind, that is bothering me, and I haven't yet taken any action on it. I find as soon as I identify it and make the first phone call or send off the first email message or whatever it is that we're going to do to start to address that situation, even if it's not solved, the mere fact that we're addressing it dramatically reduces any stress that might come from it. So stress comes from ignoring things that you shouldn't be ignoring, I think, in large part. So stress doesn't come. People get stress wrong all the time, in my opinion. Stress doesn't come from hard work, for example. You know, you can be working incredibly hard and loving it. And likewise, you can be out of work and incredibly stressed over that. So, and likewise, if you kind of use that as an analogy for what I was just talking about, if you're out of work, but you're going through, you know, a disciplined approach of, you know, a series of job interviews and so on, and working to remedy that situation, you're going to be a lot less stressed than if you're just worrying about it and doing nothing.